Okay, we'll get started. So I think I introduced myself before. My name is Brian Hillard. I am a student at Penn State University, and this is my student analysis of the Penn Forest Township wind turbine project. Brian Hillard, Penn State University. My program is Energy and Sustainability Policy. Sustainability, that's a heavy dose of renewables, but it's a study of all forms of energy, and it's policy. It is how individuals and governments make decisions about how we use and generate energy in our communities. And honestly, I've really fallen in love with the program because it's a conversation. It becomes a conversation of how we interact with energy, and I'm a person that I enjoy conversation, so it invites me to talk to other people about these kind of issues. And you see there, we talked about December 2017, 2 weeks I am going to be graduating. Energy policy, and we in Pennsylvania, we have a long history of our own unique introduction to forms of energy. History of coal in PA, I think we all know the history of coal in Pennsylvania. 1775 anthracite was first mined, and I think that was they've used coal for a long time, but the potency, the high energy density of anthracite coal allowed for a lot of work to get done. It didn't take long, and by 1914, we were employing 180,000 people to mine coal, and we were producing 100 million tons of it. Obviously it had its costs, though. It was very risky employment to take on. And you see, in 1959 we had the Knox coal mine disaster, in Susquehanna River, that breached the mines, and it signaled a decline of anthracite mining in PA. And now we're down to 5.2 million tons. We're still mining, but not nearly as much. Oil actually has its own place in PA too. The way we know oil today, the way we use oil today, has its beginnings in Pennsylvania. Back in what was it? It was early. Do I have it there? It was early the 20th century. No, I'm sorry, late 19th century. It was. They had this oil seeping out of the ground out in western Pennsylvania. Oil Creek, I'm guessing that's how it got its name, probably. Oil Creek Valley out in Titusville and Oil City out there. They discovered this oil, and it kind of grew out of the need for lamp oil, because at the time they were using whale oil to heat the lamps, and they were overfished, and they were becoming really hard to find that source to fuel lamps. And speculators went down there and said, "We got this stuff seeping out of the ground. We know we can do something." Start messing around with it, and that's how that started. And once they figured out that they could use it for this, you see there, 1859, production grew from 4,500 barrels to 10 million by 1873. 14 years, they're pumping 10 million barrels out of the ground. Today, we are. I think that's a mistake. There would be remained a significant producer. Yeah, no, that's right. Through the years, we still were pumping oil, but not nearly at that scope as discoveries in Texas and elsewhere kind of dominated that. Natural gas actually has its own start in Pennsylvania as well, as another form of energy that we knew kind of what it did, but we really didn't know how to harness it. And it wasn't until some speculators said, I think if we construct this infrastructure, we construct a way, we can actually use this. So these speculators that started in Murraysville, Westmoreland County, they found a way to build the infrastructure, build the piping, and harness natural gas as an energy source. And it wasn't until it plateaued for a while in the mid to late 20th century, and it wasn't until they figured out fracking technology, hydraulic fracturing. With, I don't know if you know, it's pretty much a combination of technology where they can drill down and sideways and then in that sideways that they're able to pump high pressure mixture of oil, water, sand, and some other chemicals in there to help viscosity and help things flow and so forth, kill bacteria. And once you discover that, that's how we have the natural gas boom that we do today. We're second right now. We're second in the country. 7,000 gas wells producing over 5 million cubic feet of gas. Nuclear energy, we all know how nuclear energy, how it's impacted Pennsylvania. We are the only critical incident to happen in the United States with 3 Mile Island. That was a harbinger of what could come. Chernobyl gave us another taste of that, and then, then of course we had Fukushima. But with coal experiencing a decline and natural gas, experiencing an increase in extraction, they've kind of evened out. And what has happened is nuclear is now the primary source of our electricity generation at 37%. Natural gas and coal are both at 24 in Pennsylvania. And that was just July 2017. That's just that snapshot. As the most recent snapshot I could get from the Energy Information Administration. But nuclear is the primary source of our electricity in Pennsylvania right now. Thing is, and we know that all of these sources, they have their impacts. Coal right now, because both the costs and the dangers of mine extraction for coal, mountaintop removal has been the primary predominant in all this. One study I read, almost close to 100% of Appalachian coal mining is done by mountaintop removal, and that has a significant impact on the ecosystem. We know all too well the impacts of acid mine drainage as well. I can just tell personally. I have a friend of mine, actually the gentleman I brought this projector from. He is a chemical engineer for air products, and the side thing, he spends a lot of time in the water. Who is
it? I was a chemical engineer in air products until I retired.
Yeah. Do you know Matt McConnell? No. He's a part of the Trout Associate as well, and he spends a lot of time with water quality, and he was just doing some acid mine testing. He has a monitor up at it's in Nesquehoning Creek, I think it is, or maybe the Pohopoho Creek. There's a acid mine drainage point up by Nesquehoning, and he has a monitor up there. He's a water quality monitor. He can measure the chemical levels in that creek, and he can spot pollution events when they happen, as they happen. But he notes that where that stream empties into the Lehigh River, there's a significant difference in the biotic quality above that and then below that stream. So we still see those impacts today. And I don't know if some of you heard of the coal ash spill out in North Carolina. I mean, pretty big news. This coal ash slurry that what do you call it? The substance from like the having a mind for it here. After coal is used, I'm drawing a blank here. The coal ash that after it's used, they have to dispose of it somehow, and they usually do that by rail. And rail cars, I don't know exactly how it happened, but the rail cars tipped over, and a lot of it spilled into the creek right there. That was a pretty big impact. Natural gas. Fracking operations, this blew my mind when I read it. Fracking operations per well can use 5 million gallons of water. And once they drill down, I don't know if we're familiar with how this works. They drill down and then sideways, and then this high pressure solution gets in there and it fractures the shale formation, and then all the gas kind of bubbles around, and then it comes back up through. But there's a cement casing right here in black that can rupture sometimes. It's not impermeable, it's not invincible. And when that casing ruptures, when there's even any kind of crack in it, that can affect the groundwater. Their solution can contain methane from the gas itself, arsenic, radon, hydrochloric acid. There's a It's a site called Frac Focus that lists. They have a listing of all the chemicals that are involved in fracking, and some of them are pretty nasty. It's not the kind of stuff we want in our groundwater. And we see here this has been it's been a reoccurring theme sometimes that homeowners near fracking operations, they end up with natural gas with methane in their groundwater, and that's not a pretty sight. Nuclear energy, we know 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, and the thing is, barring those incidents, nuclear energy is actually a very safe method of electricity generation. You know, you take those incidents out, and even if you average it all out as far as incidents per per kilowatt generated or whatever, megawatt generated, has one of the highest safety ratings across the industry. But there is that potential for that one catastrophic event that scares the bejesus out of us. And then of course there is no safe long-term solution for the waste. So that's an issue as well. So with that, we have a choice, and that is how wind turbine technology, that's how solar panel technology, that is how that has gained traction because of all the environmental risks that other energy sources pose. Avangrid Renewables with Bethlehem Authority proposed wind turbine installation on the Penn Forest Reservoir Tract. 37 turbines were included in this plan. It was originally 40 until the Heighton said, we don't want it on our property. The project calls for 292 acres of land disturbance. It includes the turbines, it includes access roads, any accompanying generation equipment. And so the project area is 9,938. It's less than 3% of the project area that was going to be disturbed. And it's kind of a key thing to kind of keep in mind when they talk about a lot of the issues. Comparatively, wind turbine technology is a lot lower environmental impact compared with other sources of generation. But as we've seen through these zoning board hearings and the public conversation, there are still impacts that a lot of people are concerned about. Through the zoning board hearings, the 4 of the main impacts that were raised were impacts to the watershed, risks to wildlife, noise pollution from the turbines, and property value depreciation. Impacts to the watershed. A hydrologist, Dr. Dodds, from West Virginia, she testified the potential risk to the watershed. This is the point that I really had the most trouble with. As I said, this project is going to take up less than 3% of the total project area. It's a very small portion that was going to be served. Especially when you compare it to other development projects in the region. If you can note this, the image I specifically grabbed this image because it was similar to the one that would probably be for this region. You have turbines near mountainsides, but there's access roads around it, and after that, it's just natural cover. It has a relatively low footprint in natural ecosystem that would allow for rapid water infiltration. You're not, have paved surfaces, and I don't know, this is one thing I'm not sure about, it's not in the project plan, whether they're going to be paved surfaces or not. Paved surfaces obviously increase runoff, but again, if there's natural area right around that, water infiltration should be rapid. Compared to other developments where they go into storm drains and then the storm drains get shuttled off into other creeks, which end up increasing the volume that creeks have to handle, especially during storm events. The wind turbine technology, especially when you compare it to other sources, there's very minimal water contamination. You're not introducing, arsenic and methane and coal ash and that kind of stuff.
They won't pave. I don't think there's paving. It's just,
I'm
just
not
compacted.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Stone.
And I would suggest if there is that one concern, if there's a concern that there is going to be significant runoff, I'm sure that accommodation could be made. The developers could make sure that there is vegetative cover around or potential runoff sites to make sure that infiltration happens. Risk to wildlife. Wind turbines are cited by consistent wind sources. It's a lot of times that can end up near migration routes. they've done a lot to try to design these turbines to reduce impacts as much as possible. They used to have a lattice work kind of, like transmission towers. They used to have that for the wind turbines until birds would be nesting in those towers. So that's when they went to the monopole. There's a reason why the turbines end up being 300 feet in the air. The higher you go, the less of an impact they're going to have with wildlife. But birds usually fly a little bit lower than that, and it also the higher elevation ends up picking up more consistent wind, at that altitude. They have installed controls in these turbines. I have to double check. I think pretty much all turbines they have some kind of high-speed cutoff to make sure that they don't spin too fast. Research studies have shown that low wind cutoff, that if the wind's not spinning fast enough, I think the threshold's 8 miles an hour. I'm not sure. They stop the turbines because the low wind. There's a direct relationship between how fast the wind is spinning or blowing and the activity of birds and especially bats. So when you have wind at lower rates, just cut off the turbines so they can't spin, so they don't end up striking birds when they're flying by. Proper sighting also impacts. If you find certain migration routes that birds have, I would like to see from this. I would like to see maybe a more comprehensive study of the migration routes in that exact region, so that could be addressed. But you realize right now, I think the study was referenced. This was a little old, but 0.2% of bird fatalities are from wind turbines. 55% of bird fatalities are from buildings, and another, over 10% are due to cats. I'm not joking. So cat owners are more likely.
I've killed 1,000 in my life with my car.
Yeah. It's just the impact of human development, and as cities grow and buildings grow and all that kind of stuff, as we take away their habitat, it's one of those things. And when you compare it to, let's say, coal mining, when you're stripping off the entire mountain, you're pretty much taking away all of their habitat like that. There was concern over noise pollution, and it is one of those things that it's still under. There's still a lot of studies being done surrounding this. Avangrid's acoustical engineer Mark Bastash, he testified that, and this is one of those little points of contention. He said the long-term average would not exceed 45 decibels. The thing is, the township ordinance state that it should not exceed 45 decibels, and there is that potential where maybe it could just exceed it on isolated events. When I looked at other studies, and again, studies are they're isolated. You have one study, it looks at one location, but it had half kilometer you'd be encroaching on 45 decibels, which is 1,800 feet, and in this project plan, the closest residence is 2,300 feet. But that's just the isolation. Environmental factors can affect how sound's going to travel, so it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what level of noise is going to be experienced at that particular location. So that's why it's one of those things that, especially as far as the township, the municipal ordinance goes, zoning ordinance goes, it's a gray area, and I think there is a point of contention there. There we go, wrong button. Property value depreciation, and this is one of those things that I really don't have a definitive answer on. I think there should be more studies to be done on this, and I couldn't find a quantifiable, what the word is there, a particular set of studies, like a broad spectrum of studies to say, to give proper representation for various communities. And we have to consider that property value is subjective, and the perspective of wind turbines is subjective. Where I could look at a wind turbine and say, I wouldn't mind it in my backyard. Other people are like, no, not happening. And that's what a lot of the residents have spoken up about in Penn Forest. They don't like them, they don't want them. And with that mindset, somebody else coming in to purchase a property if they don't like the turbines, they're not gonna pay $220,000 for the house that was, that someone else might pay for. So property value depreciation is a factor that I think has value. There were other concerns that were raised through informal channels, through personal conversations, through Facebook, commentary and stuff like that. Turbine fires, it's a thing. Sometimes the components within turbines, the way they mechanically operate, especially if the braking system for too high speeds, if that fails somehow, then turbine fires can happen. And then there's videos you can search, and there's videos of turbines catching fire. And once they catch fire, I mean, these things are 300 feet in the air. There's not much you can do about it. My first thought, honestly, I would love to see an automatic feature, kind of like a airbag system or something like that. Some kind of auto extinguish feature where there's some kind of fire retardant in that, extinguishing chemical within the turbine casing. So if there's a fire detected, that thing goes off and can put it out. Especially if we're looking at putting this in a wooded, ecosystem. That's a concern, and I do understand that. A conversation I had with one gentleman, he said, worker safety, he said, these guys, you don't realize, like, the workers of the turbines, they're dying by the thousands. And it's one of the things where you kind of need to vet your resources when you're taking in information. The information this chart that I pulled up of was from Forbes, but they amassed their information from OSHA and other government sites that track this kind of things. Wind turbine technology is actually one of the safest. I think that might be a little small to read. They established a baseline here of a baseline energy use per trillion watt hours, deaths per trillion watt hours. So per unit of energy generated, winds down there at like 150. You're looking at 2%. Whereas coal in the U.S. that has very strict standards, they're still at 10,000 deaths per that unit. Natural gas at 4,000. Oil used for electricity at 36,000. And we see nuclear. Remember we talked about nuclear down there. And they say nuclear global average, including Chernobyl and Fukushima, is at 90. So it's still less than wind. But the concern over worker safety for turbines is not really there. And if you look at OSHA and you look at the incidence of wind turbine injuries and deaths, a lot of times it's due to worker negligence, and that kind of thing. I do warehouse work right now. I know all too well what it's like to be working and to you're trying to do that, and you have a moment of bad judgment, or you're just trying to rush or whatever. Accidents happen. So that kind of thing. It's better worker training. Making sure that they're using their harnesses correctly, making sure that they're being mindful of how they're moving and so forth. But by nature, wind could if there was proper training and so forth, wind could have zero. Whereas industries like coal, it's a much more dangerous occupation. Light flicker. This comes to both light reflecting off of turbines. And you're talking about like when the sun gets a very specific pitch, and as the blade spins, the light might reflect off of it and reflect back to somebody's house. That can happen sometimes depending on the way sun is. I know that there are residents that are on the north side of the ridge, so as the sun is in the south, they might get a shadow flicker, the shadow effect from the turbines that might be an annoyance. I can understand that, that can understand your quality of life where you're living. But I think, again, by the siting, there'll be very few homes that would be affected by that. Someone said, all this big money's going to the big wind farm corporations or whatever. I think there's two things to think about. That a lot of energy companies are big, corporations, and wherever whether you get your gas from BP or ExxonMobil or whatever, all that money is going to big corporations too. Two, I think I like the idea to a degree of the big energy corporations, because there's a degree where I don't know if I would want a mom and pop operation putting up 500-foot wind turbines. I don't know if I want a mom and pop operation doing fracking operations, because at some point you need a level of experience and a level of professionalism and a level of accountability. You have, even now some days, you have these subsidiary companies that, you want to sue them, all of a sudden, oh, bankrupt, they fold up, and then there's no kind of, accountability. But, you have, things happen, these fracking operations happen, you have pipeline oil spills, if you have a turbine fire, you want a big corporation that has the accountability and the responsibility and the resources to settle issues as they see fit, both with the individuals affected as well as making sure that that incident doesn't happen again, that the incident is remedied, that kind of thing. Someone else said there's no cost benefit analysis. Given the fact that wind turbine generation has reached price parity in a lot of regions now, it is competitive with natural gas, and the fact that there is a lower environmental impact when you compare it to other sources of energy, I think that is the cost benefit analysis. As far as, and this is to address specifically the Penn Township ordinances, the Penn Township Zoning Board, at the conclusion of those hearings, issued a document for statements of fact, and then conclusions of law. Statements of fact were just issues going down, the list of all the testimony that was offered through the hearings, and then afterwards they made conclusions of law, 50-some conclusions of law, I believe I have over there. And honestly, reading through, some of them I was a little bit disappointed in, just because I'm not sure how they were able to make the assumption they did. Through the testimony, Craig Poff, the business developer for Avangrid, he stated in testimony that the plan that they have for these turbines now, they're not exact. They have layout of where the turbine's going to be, but they're not going to be exactly where they are. And from a construction standpoint, that's just the way things go. Sometimes it can't be right here, but well, the feature will just put it right there, right next door. But he stated that there's going to be very minimal variation to that. They're just about where they're supposed to be. But in the conclusions of law, they said, well, this turbine is 2,300 feet from the residence, but because Craig Poff doesn't know where, it doesn't say exactly where it's going to be. It could be 1,500 feet, and I can't see why the assumption was made that they're going to move it 800 feet in any given direction. That's not how the layout would work. But the one of those conclusions of law said that the wind turbines did not meet under the wind turbine zoning ordinance in the municipal code. It did not meet conditions A, C, E, F, G, I, M, O, and P. And to address specifically, A says wind turbines should be set back at least 3 times nearest occupied dwelling. That is a safety feature. If the wind turbine is 500 feet, they can't be within 15 feet or 1,500 feet of any residence, and that goes back to that assumption that they were making that, well, they're not exactly there, so they can move them anywhere, and it's an assumption that I can't make that connection. They're not going to move them that much. And if I were to, I think in the next slide I address that. Ordinance subsection C, owners should completely remove turbines within 12 months after discontinued use, and they're referencing, I believe the lease agreement with Bethlehem Authority was 18 months, but again, Craig Poff had testified that they would be removed. Once the turbines are done working, stop generating electricity, they have to be removed within 12 months. Subsection E, turbine and related construction should meet Uniform Construction Code, National Electric Code.
I don't understand that.
It pretty much
these turbines are going to run for 40 years, not.
Well, I think, and it's all. I think that's just a general assumption. Like 20 years is just a general rule.
Yeah.
I think every site has unique, variables, and the turbines have unique variables. The specific product line, depending on, whatever factors would impact their lifetime. So I think, to be honest, I think there was a general understanding of 20 years-ish. I don't think there was any finite determination on how long they'd be, and I don't think there would be. I think they would, use them as long as they did. I know other wind farms have actually, they'll put like a 25 year lifespan on these turbines, and then 8 years down the road, I mean, granted it was monetarily feasible, they end up replacing them because they had more efficient models that ended up coming out. That was just the nature of technology that as it developed. I don't think the models today, I don't think that there would be any technological leap, but they would, seek to do that. But turbines related to meet uniform construction code, national electric code is just like any other, any other development, any other installation. You go to building, you put up a billboard, whatever. Like it has to meet construction codes. Design facilities should conform to industry standards. Turbines should be equipped with a redundant braking system, which we talked about. Turbines should meet lighting requirements of the FAA. Applicants should make reasonable efforts to avoid radio and television signals. Site plan should show proposed driveways, which I suppose the site plan that Avangrid provided didn't have the locations of where the access roads would be. And we talked about the audible sounds should not exceed 45 decibels. These are the ordinances that were cited in the conclusions of the law that Avangrid was not meeting. They said subsection A, they're not meeting A, they're not meeting C, they're not meeting A, and for those reasons, that's why we're denying them. I put on the side of the resolution, these were just my musings on this kind of thing. As stated in the application itself, the turbines would be 2,383 feet from the nearest occupied dwelling. That is in their application. So they're kind of bound by that. They're not going to move them, right up against someone's property line. So I kind of, that one I really didn't understand. And if there was anything that I would say to that is, maybe Avangrid can come back with a more definitive statement as to, and a clarification of the variance that they would say. So if the turbine is exactly here on the project plan, we're not looking at moving it more than 20 feet or so in any given direction, just to accommodate for localized variations in geology and so forth. Owners should completely remove turbines. Like I said, he testified that they were going to be removed after 12 months. I think if anything, I would recommend is that the lease agreement that they have with Bethlehem Authority should be amended to accommodate for that, and that would provide a little bit more certainty for the township. Turbine-related construction code, meet uniform construction code, industry standards. I think the thing is, it's kind of assumed that they have to go through when they go through this turbine process. This is just the very first step. They have to go through a whole series of assessments and certifications and so forth with all different kinds of agencies, with the FAA, with the military. They have to provide an environmental impact statement, and that's going to address the hydrology and stormwater runoff. They have to address these features before they can go through. So in a way, the zoning is kind of redundant, but at the same time, Penn Forest Township wants to cover their bases. So I would say to that, even though it is reasonably assumed that Avangrid is going to take care of these things, they should put a little more certainty in that hey, these issues are going to be covered. It's going to be built according to industry standards. I think the other contention was the type of turbine was going to be used, like the specific model. Where was it Gamesa 8700? The specific model that was going to be used for these, and because they didn't know which type they're going to be used yet. They're still in this project planning phase, because they didn't cite the model. They can't say, well, it conforms to the National Electric Code, even though they're all going to, because they can't use these in the U.S. unless they conform to National Electric Codes. So if there's anything I would say to that is that somehow, Avangrid could maybe isolate a model number or whatever, somehow assure them that, formally somehow assure them that that it's going to meet industry standard, it's going to meet the codes and all that kind of thing. Again, with the FAA lighting, make sure that the turbines are properly equipped with lighting, so airplanes passing by know that they're there. I think was it, avoid radio signals. So I think Avangrid somehow they have to demonstrate compliance. That's not going to affect radio signals and TV signals. Site plan should show proposed driveways, and that is in the ordinance. And I think that's one thing Avangrid should have done beforehand. In their project plan, it's in the ordinance that they have the driveways. So I think they should, place the access roads on that plan to meet the ordinance compliance. And then again, going back to the sound levels, I think that is that gray area where it's not to exceed 45 decibels. And personally, if I were to make a suggestion, they have 37 turbines. I have the plan somewhere, I can bring that up too. They have 37 turbines that are proposed. Maybe hold on. They have 37 turbines proposed right here. And you see, this is Lipa Way. There's actually some of the people I talked to. Chris Mangold is there. Gentleman I interviewed, Ed Hoffey is there. Eric, I believe, Eric Reese, he's over here in orange. This arm right here, these are the closest ones that are going to be. Those would be within 2,300 feet. And if there is that gray area, if there is that concern that it could exceed 45 decibels, if that is the, I would suggest maybe you scale back the project a little bit. You have a very passionate group of residents there that they're against the turbines, and I mean, as a homeowner, I get it. My wife and I, we've lived in Bethlehem for 12 years now, and anything going on in the community, we're concerned about whatnot. Obviously, it's a different community than this one, but the people that have purchased like houses up here, they purchased up here for a reason, and maybe they like the fact that it's not developed. So with that in mind, if Avangrid wanted to keep pushing this project forward, I would almost suggest maybe you have do it in a multi-stage kind of project plan there. Maybe you look at this arm right here. Maybe you don't develop that one just yet. And you have, I think, a couple residents down here that were adamantly against it, and they would face the next closest impact. Maybe you only develop up to here. Maybe you include these, you include those, maybe down there, but maybe you leave out these two sections and say, okay, we're gonna develop this part. Then we can see how it goes. Then we can conduct, verifiable, quantifiable noise studies on these turbines in this location. We can see exactly where,
But they're working on the noise level on turbines. The turbines that they're produced 5 years ago are noisier than the ones they produce today.
Yeah.
And if this takes 5 years to develop, they're gonna have different turbines 5 years from now that'll be quieter.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, the residents that have raised their concerns, they're very passionate about these, how the impact is going to be on their life up here. And if there was a way, I think, again, going back to that conversation, how we introduce energy in new communities, I think there has to be a lot of conversations, just listening, just shutting your mouths and what do you have to say, what do you think, and with their concerns being raised, I think personally, I think Avangrid should listen a little bit and say, what, if you're that concerned, maybe we won't put these turbines up here. Maybe we won't put in those turbines just yet. Even if they lay the groundwork for them, even if the transmission lines are installed or whatever, maybe not. We'll put in this arm down here, we'll put in the ones down here, and then we can do quantifiable wind studies on how they're affected.
From my perspective, okay. Wind has to be put close to the grid,
Mm-hmm.
or the demand,
Mm-hmm.
and it has to be sited at some place that has wind.
Yeah.
Okay? When you put all those restrictions, and then put on another, all the restrictions that you're talking about here, as far as closeness to, you know, residents and so forth, there is very few plots of land that fit all four of those criteria. And this one has a specific second use that wind turbines aren't going to affect. That is, it is the watershed for the city of Bethlehem.
Mhm.
This ain't gonna, all those houses affected the watershed 1,000 times more than what this wind project is gonna. All those septic systems, all those, all that blacktop, everything that all those houses did. The true thing we should do is tear those goddamn houses down.
No, that was actually an interesting, that was brought up by one of my other interviews that I had, that the Township and Trails development, I think there's 1,000 homes in that thing or whatever. And if you look at the increased runoff, you know, from theirs and the septic systems and, you know, any kind of residential pollutants that sometimes get introduced, you know, into the water system and whatnot. And that's the kind of thing that,
I mean, the watershed was, you know, established that far enough back that they didn't go to the edge of the watershed, you know, the true edge of the watershed,
yeah.
you know,
And I think
because they had limited resources. Now all these housing projects have actually undone. I don't, you know, I'm just.
And the thing, the one other thing that kind of, that
I mean, you're looking at the impact of these turbines, but there's nothing wrong with saying
impact of everything else.
and stacking up against it.
And the one thing that instantly struck me too, you know, from very early on, it's on Bethlehem's own watershed, and we actually have a very high quality rating for the water that comes into Bethlehem.
It is,
And
it's
you know,
the best.
And you just have to question, why would Bethlehem agree to a project that would jeopardize the high quality of their water?
Absolutely.
You know, but you know, in that you know tone of conversation, you know, I think, you know,
Lehighton Water Authority is a butts.
Because right here,
Wait,
there were supposed to be 3 other turbines right here. This arm was supposed to stretch over.
Okay.
It was either, I think it was over here. I know it's over here.
Why-
This is the Lehighton water.
why am I so confused?
So,
No, what that's the water, on the bottom, that's the tail end of Beltsville,
yeah, it slows down here.
and then that's Wild Creek.
Unless I recollect wrong, I remember looking at a map and the proposed.
Wild Creek has two reservoirs, and
Yeah, there's Penn Forest and then there's the Wild Creek Reservoir.
yeah, I'm just, I could show you my house if it was a little bit bigger than that.
I'm not sure which one of these is going to be. I took snapshots of the plan.
That's all right. That's all right.
Yeah, there's the one arm. That was Leap Away.
No,
And that's the top. That's the northeast arm of that right there. No, I was wrong. I was mistaken. This, I believe, is the.
the Lehighton Water Authority should be on to the west of that.
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
I was wrong. The this has to be rotated.
Lehighton Water Authority is coming over
Okay.
closer to around the Maury Road.
This is, I believe, this is the hook of the watershed down here, and those are the 3 on the Lehighton water. So yeah, you're right. This was on the west side. I was wrong. So those are the 3. Those are the 3 ones that were done. So my presentation is limited at 45 minutes, and I'm pretty much there. So formally, I'm going to wrap this up.